Wow! Meghan Markle and her spare Prince Harry have struck an amazing new deal with Netflix. Or have they? The delighted Duchess declaring in a carefully...
King Charles just signed Meghan Markle's royal death warrant, not with ink, but with silence. When the House of Lords moved to strip her of every remaining title, every privilege, every connection to the crown, Charles did nothing to stop them. In the language of monarchy, that silence was deafening.
Work together. So, brilliant! Another 5-year contract worth $100 million, yeah? Oh, no. Wait a minute. It's not quite as lucrative as that. In fact, the
woman who entered Windsor Castle as a Hollywood actress and left as the Duchess of Sussex may soon be just Meghan Markle again. Plain Meghan, no title, no royal status, no foundation for the empire she'd built in California. This wasn't a palace leak or tabloid speculation. This was Britain's establishment declaring war.
You were sucked in by Ms. Markle's gushing announcement. You'd have thought that nothing had changed. So thrilled are Netflix bosses with their royal recruits that they're only too happy to hurl yet more mountains.
The petition emerged from the House of Lords like thunder from a clear sky. These weren't tabloid editors or social media critics. These were peers of the realm, the guardians of British tradition, formally demanding that Meghan Markle be stripped of her Duchess title. Their reasoning was surgical in its precision: commercial exploitation of the crown, repeated media attacks on the royal family, using titles as weapons while attacking the institution that granted them.
It's like a classic slice of Meg spin, and a rather different reality emerges. This is a first look agreement which amounts to Netflix executives telling the difficult...
The Lords don't act lightly. Their last intervention of this magnitude was decades ago. For them to move now, with this force, meant something fundamental had shifted. The soft exit deal of 2020, the compromise that let Harry and Meghan keep their titles while pursuing commercial ventures, was being retroactively revoked, not renegotiated. Revoked. But the real shock wasn't the petition itself. It was what King Charles didn't do.
It won't amount to even a tiny fraction of the megabucks they've been receiving since 2020. And if the not famous...
By protocol, the monarch rarely intervenes in parliamentary petitions, but sources inside the palace confirmed Charles was fully briefed on the Lords' initiative. He could have signaled displeasure. He could have had private words with key peers. He could have delayed or deflected. Instead, he did nothing. In royal terms, that's not neutrality, that's endorsement.
Lots of laughs. But of course, there'll be no sign of Meghan's family, her father, her brother, and her sister, all having been ruthlessly removed from her faux aristocratic world. And not a hint of Harry's royal family, none of whom talk to their sulky renegade relative anymore.
The timing was devastating for Meghan. She'd just announced new Netflix projects, all marketed with her Duchess credentials prominently displayed. Book deals were in negotiation. Brand partnerships were being finalized. Every contract, every appearance fee, every marketing campaign was built on the foundation of that title. Without it, she wasn't a duchess building a media empire. She was an actress trying to stay relevant.
After the disgraceful disrespect he has shown them since running away from his regal duties. Meghan's father, Thomas Markle, has never met his ginger son-in-law and never set eyes on his grandchildren. King Charles hasn't seen Archie and Lilibet for years and no longer trusts.
Sources in Montecito described Meghan's reaction as volcanic. She'd assumed the titles were permanent, irrevocable, her property to monetize as she wished. The idea that they could be stripped away, that the very identity she'd commercialized could be revoked, had never seriously occurred to her. Now it wasn't just possible, it was happening.
The petulant prince who turned on him so much for the Sussexes' family Christmas. Also part of the Duke and Duchess's new unimproved deal is a documentary all about Uganda's HIV/AIDS crisis, exuding Harry's white saviour-style worthiness.
The mechanism was brutally elegant. The Lords weren't asking for negotiation or compromise. They were demanding complete revocation. No Duke and Duchess of Sussex, no His and Her Royal Highness, no connection to the crown whatsoever. It would be as if the royal chapter of Meghan's life had been officially erased. The last time Britain saw such a complete stripping of royal dignity was Edward VIII's abdication. For Meghan to even be in that historical company showed how far she'd fallen.
to Bali amid a row over his alleged colonialist leadership. The dim Duke is reported to be devastated. As usual, in times of trouble for her hapless husband, Meghan has maintained a wall of silence. Why is that? Discuss.
The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Polls showed 73% of Britons supported stripping the titles. Even among younger demographics who'd once sympathized with Meghan, support for the Lord's petition was strong. Social media exploded with hashtags. Strip the titles trended for days. Plain Meghan became a meme. The court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict before any official decision was made. But the implications went far beyond public humiliation. Every Hollywood deal Meghan had signed contained her title. The Duchess of Sussex wasn't just her name, it was her brand, her unique selling proposition, her competitive advantage in a crowded celebrity marketplace. Netflix hadn't signed Meghan Markle, actress. They'd signed the Duchess of Sussex, royal rebel. Without that title, contract values would need renegotiation. Speaking fees would plummet. Book advances might be withdrawn. Financial analysts estimated the title stripping could cost Meghan tens of millions in lost deals and devalued contracts. The Montecito mansion, already heavily mortgaged, would become harder to maintain. The lifestyle built on royal adjacency would become unsustainable. The empire constructed on a Duchess identity would crumble if that identity was officially revoked. Harry's position was even more complex. As a blood prince, his title was harder to revoke. But if Meghan lost her Duchess status, what would that make him? A prince married to a commoner? The asymmetry would be excruciating. Every public appearance would highlight the disparity. Every introduction would emphasize what she'd lost. The partnership they'd marketed as equals would be exposed as fundamentally unbalanced. Behind closed doors in Montecito, sources described explosive arguments. Meghan reportedly blamed Harry for not protecting her, for not having better relationships with Charles, for not understanding how vulnerable her position was. Harry allegedly responded that her media attacks had made this inevitable, that she'd pushed too hard, monetized too aggressively, burned bridges that should have been preserved. The California dream was becoming a nightmare. The freedom they'd sought from royal constraints had led to a different kind of trap. Without titles, they were just another celebrity couple in a town full of celebrity couples. Without royal connection, they were competing on pure star power, and that star was fading fast. Hollywood's reaction was telling. The silence from Meghan's supposed allies was deafening. No celebrity statements of support, no social media solidarity. The entertainment industry that had initially embraced the Duchess was already distancing itself from what might soon be plain Meghan Markle. In Hollywood, you're only as valuable as your next project, and without a title, Meghan's next projects look significantly less valuable. The Lord's petition included devastating details. They cited specific instances where Meghan had used her title for commercial gain while simultaneously attacking the institution. The Oprah interview where she'd accused the royals of racism while sitting under a Duchess of Sussex caption. The Netflix series that monetized private royal moments while marketing her Duchess status. The podcast that criticized royal tradition while trading on royal fame. One peer was quoted saying titles were sacred trusts, not commercial assets. They represented centuries of tradition, duty, and service. To use them as marketing tools while undermining their source was not just inappropriate, it was sacrilegious. The Lords weren't just protecting the monarchy, they were protecting the very concept of nobility from commercialization. The international response varied dramatically. American media, once sympathetic to Meghan, began questioning whether she'd overplayed her hand. British Commonwealth countries largely supported the title stripping. European royalty watched with interest, seeing it as a test case for how modern monarchies handle rogue royals. The consensus was clear. Meghan had pushed boundaries that shouldn't have been pushed. For King Charles, the decision to not intervene was both personal and institutional. As a father, he was allowing his son's wife to be publicly humiliated. As a king, he was protecting the crown from exploitation. Sources suggested Charles had agonized over the decision, but ultimately concluded that the institution was bigger than any individual, even family. The monarchy had survived for centuries by putting institution above person. This was just another example. The legal implications were complex, but clear. While the Lords could petition and the king could approve, the actual stripping would require formal process. But once that process began, it would be essentially irreversible. Meghan could fight it legally, but fighting would only emphasize her desperation to keep titles she'd claimed not to need. The trap was perfectly set. Fight and look pathetic. Accept and lose everything. Netflix executives were reportedly in emergency meetings. Their deal with the Sussexes was predicated on royal content. Without titles, what were they buying? Just another celebrity couple story. The streaming wars were too competitive for sentiment. If the titles went, the deals would likely follow. The $100 million question was becoming whether Netflix would even honor existing commitments. Meghan's team attempted damage control, carefully worded statements about service being universal, about titles not defining worth, about continuing their important work regardless of recognition, but the statements rang hollow. Everyone knew Meghan had built everything on that title. Pretending otherwise was just another performance, and audiences were tired of the show. The cruelest irony was that Meghan had achieved exactly what she'd claimed to want: freedom from the palace, independence from royal control, the ability to speak her truth without constraint. But in achieving that freedom, she'd lost the very thing that made her freedom valuable. Without the palace, she was just another voice in the wilderness. Without royal connection, her truth was just another opinion. 6 months from now, if the Lord's petition succeeds, Meghan Markle will face an existential crisis. The Duchess identity she'd monetized, the royal rebellion she'd marketed, the palace victim narrative she'd sold, all of it would be officially nullified. She'd be what critics always said she was: an actress who married above her station and couldn't handle the responsibility. The Hollywood parties would still invite her at first. The charity events would still include her, initially. But gradually, without the title that made her special, she'd fade into the background. Another former celebrity trying to stay relevant. Another aging actress looking for the next role. Another Californian with a big mortgage and shrinking prospects. For Harry, the future would be even more complex. Still technically a prince, but married to a commoner. Still royal by blood, but excluded by choice. He'd exist in a liminal space, neither fully royal nor fully common. The worst of both worlds. The man who gave up everything for love would discover that love couldn't replace what he'd lost. The House of Lords had played a masterpiece of institutional chess. They'd waited for public opinion to turn decisively. They'd accumulated evidence of commercial exploitation. They'd chosen their moment when Meghan was vulnerable, but not sympathetic. And they'd struck with surgical precision, not attacking her personally, but professionally. Not criticizing her character, but her conduct. King Charles's silence was equally strategic. By not opposing the petition, he'd aligned himself with public opinion, while maintaining plausible deniability. He hadn't stripped his daughter-in-law of titles. He'd simply not prevented the constitutional process from proceeding. The monarchy emerged looking responsive to public will, rather than vindictive toward family. The British establishment had closed ranks in a way not seen for generations. Lords, commons, crown, and public all aligned against someone who'd threatened the system. Meghan had thought she was bigger than the institution. She'd learned too late that in Britain, no one is bigger than the crown. The 1,000-year-old monarchy had survived wars, scandals, and revolutions. It would survive Meghan Markle. Current reports suggest Meghan is exploring options. Legal challenges are being considered. American citizenship implications are being examined. Alternative branding strategies are being developed. But everyone involved knows the truth. Once the titles are gone, they're gone forever. There's no appeal process for royal disgrace. No rehabilitation program for stripped duchesses. The woman who'd entered the royal family amid such fanfare, who'd been given every privilege and platform, who'd had the world at her feet, was about to lose it all. Not through revolution or tragedy, but through her own choices. Every interview, every disclosure, every commercialization had led to this moment. The Duchess who'd wanted to have it all was about to have nothing. So here's the question that echoes through palaces and parliaments, through Hollywood studios and Montecito mansions. What happens to someone whose entire identity is built on a title that's about to be revoked? Does Meghan Markle exist without the Duchess of Sussex? Can a brand built on royalty survive without royal connection? The answer isn't philosophical, it's practical. In a world where perception is reality and titles are currency, losing your title means losing your value. The market doesn't care about your struggles or your truth. It cares about what you can sell. And without a Duchess title, Meghan Markle has very little left to sell. The final irony is perfect in its cruelty. Meghan had said titles don't define worth, that service is universal, that authenticity matters more than position. She's about to get the chance to prove it. Without titles, without royal connection, without the platform she'd monetized, she'll discover whether Meghan Markle, the person, has any value beyond Meghan Markle, the Duchess. The British establishment is betting she doesn't. King Charles's silence suggests he agrees. The House of Lords has made their position clear. The public has delivered their verdict. The only question remaining is whether Meghan will fight the inevitable or accept the consequences of choices she freely made. Either way, the Duchess who dreamed of conquering Hollywood is about to become a cautionary tale about the price of biting the hand that titled you.